The estimated cost of a complete repair solution amounted to over $1.5 million. Otane felt he had no alternative but to file a fitness for purpose claim against his architect, the contractor, the material supplier, and the installer. He had engaged Poblano and contracted with Caustic's Construction to provide him with an elegant residence at a cost of $5 million. Instead, he was stuck with a crumbling embarrassment that continued to drain his resources. Welcome to The Claims-Free Architect, the podcast that helps architects understand risk and protect themselves and their practice from claims by learning crucial lessons from our archive of over 6,000 past insurance claims. The Claims-Free Architect is produced by Pro-Demnity Insurance Company, whose cause is to champion architects' wise, efficient, and effective management of risk and build thriving practices. Can an edifice of historical grandeur be replicated with inexpensive modern materials? And what if they haven't been tested in Ontario's harsh climatic conditions? Agreeing to build a high-quality neoclassical masterpiece in the Ontario hinterlands without the extravagant budget required can only result in a deteriorating client relationship and a dilapidated building. Help your colleagues protect your firm from allegations of errors, omissions, or negligence that may arise from the practice of architecture by sharing the wisdom from our stories. All you have to do is share this episode with one or more colleagues and let them know they can subscribe to our feed in their favorite podcast app. A wealthy client had commissioned an architect to create a grand chateau modeled after Le Petit Trianon in Versailles, and the finished structure bore an impressive resemblance to the original, glorious in every respect except one. Where Marie Antoinette's palace continues to weather the elements after more than 250 years, the contemporary knockoff started falling apart after less than 5. This story is called Sham Chateau. Robert Otane, an affluent stockbroker and amateur golfer, bought some property adjacent to the exclusive Parterre Golf Course in eastern Ontario. On this site, he proposed to construct an impressive neoclassical mansion modeled after Le Petit Trianon. He expected his new chateau to emulate the spirit, if not the precise appearance, of the French landmark, right down to the fastidious detailing and well-tended gardens. For Otane, money was no object. To accomplish his dream, he hired Lavinia Poblano, an architect with a respectable reputation for traditional residential design. Otane was happy to cover his architect's expenses for first-hand research in Europe, visiting and photographing various country homes and small chateaux in France and the Netherlands. On her return to Ontario, Poblano roughed out some design sketches, in pencil, of course, and had them priced out. Not surprisingly, the cost involved in cutting stone blocks and duplicating stone moldings, or even reproducing them in concrete, was off the charts. Despite his professed wealth, Otane couldn't see spending that much money. Louis XV, after all, had the royal treasury to pillage, but Otane had only his Bay Street earnings to rely on. Poblano was deeply disappointed by her client's reaction, so, to regain Otane's confidence, she informed him that her research was not in vain. She was sure that an authentic appearance could still be accomplished without using authentic materials and construction. There was a broad range of materials available that could convincingly imitate the appearance of stone without the expense. Both she and Otane agreed to do a little more research. It was Otain who came up with the solution, a lightweight, aerated, cementitious plastic material coated with a skin coat of stucco that effectively simulated real stone. Using this material, one could very inexpensively mold Corinthian capitals, cast acanthus leaves, and reproduce eggs and darts from simple plastic molds. This lightweight technology made transportation and installation a snap. Using this faux material, the house was completed within Otain's generous budget and looked entirely authentic, until the first spring thaw. As melting ice fell from the eaves and sills, so did chunks of the building. Dentils dropped like icicles, and acanthus leaves fluttered to the ground. More troubling, windowsills were starting to crack. Since the construction was still under warranty, the contractor patched up the offending problems without needing to call on the architect. It was an easy task, and everything looked good as new again. The following spring, the problems returned with a vengeance. Not only were pieces of the building falling off, but virtually all the classical details were discolored and splitting apart. The miraculous lightweight system had met its match in the freeze-thaw cycles of the Canadian winter. This was no longer an easy fix. What began as a simple patch-up job was becoming an annual chore. In fact, the dilapidation of the exterior had accelerated to the point that within 5 years, Otain was faced with almost total replacement of copings, sills, column caps, and all the classical stone detailing that gave the design its presumed authenticity. The most rapid devastation had occurred where the material was exposed on all sides, such as the balustrades and the projecting cornices located at the roofline and above the window openings. It was a total shambles. It looked like a 200-year-old ruin. The estimated cost of a complete repair solution amounted to over $1.5 million. Otain felt he had no alternative but to file a fitness for purpose claim against his architect, the contractor, the material supplier, and the installer. He had engaged Poblano and contracted with Caustic's Construction to provide him with an elegant residence at a cost of $5 million. Instead, he was stuck with a crumbling embarrassment that continued to drain his resources. The claim was for $2 million to cover the anticipated cost of repairs and the considerable inconvenience caused to Otain. Lavinia Poblano had been aware of the mounting problems with the simulated chateau, but still, she was distressed by the claim against her. As she told Pro-Demnity, she was proud of her Beaux-Arts training and had been enthusiastic about creating an elegant edifice with limestone carvings and historically correct detailing. There was nothing wrong with the design and detailing, and nothing would have gone wrong with the house if it had been built according to her original drawings. But her client had gotten cold feet when confronted by the price tag, even though Poblano had believed then and still believed that Otain could have afforded it. What had resulted was not just a dilapidated relic, it was also an affront to Poblano's reputation. The architect then explained to Pro-Demnity how the selection of the plastic material had been made in the first place. The fake stone was called Leapspan. It was manufactured in Mexico and sold through a Montreal agency, Emmenthal Quebec Limité, which had salesmen across the country. One of them had met Otain at a trade show and persuaded him that the product would be perfect for his chateau. To Otain and Poblano, everything seemed legitimate, so the architect carried out her client's instructions by approving everything: the material, the shop drawings, and the work in place. Poblano described the Leapspan sales kit with its glorious pictures of Mexican villas in lush desert oasis settings where harsh elements such as ice and snow, even rain, were rarely seen. One image showed a broad patio on which dozens of guests were eating and drinking, enclosed by a massive Leapspan balustrade supported by squat classical columns. By comparison, a similar setting at Otaine's mansion had turned to near disaster, after which guests had to be asked not to sit or lean on the crumbling balustrade. Our defense would have to be simple pro forma until we got some idea of what the other defendants were going to say and how much trouble Poblano was in. The contractor Corey Costix had a predictable defense, challenging the plaintiff to point out any instances where he had failed to follow the contract documents. He admitted to introducing the Leapspan salesman to the owner, but took no responsibility for endorsing or warranting the product. He had been asked to help in finding a more economical approach, and Leapspan was one of the products he had turned up. Leapspan's defense boiled down to caveat emptor, buyer beware. Their sales literature made no claims and contained no details. Their warranty was for replacement of materials only, and by materials, they meant bags of powder and drums of acrylic stucco. In their view, the architect and subcontractor were responsible for the use or abuse of their product. The subcontractor, Flourish Moldings and Stucco Limited, which had cast the units for installation by others, was no longer in business. Pro-Demnity engaged an architectural restoration specialist, Mildred Savage, to review the project and advise us on anything she could find that might contribute to a defense. Ms. Savage brought in some pieces of the Leapspan coping that she had picked up on the site and placed them on the claims specialist's desk. It was quite clear that this was going to be a pretty tough material choice to defend. Ms. Savage's samples consisted of bits of lightweight foamy material wrapped around plywood forms with plywood strips embedded in the foam to lend some degree of strength. The foam had been coated with acrylic stucco that looked more like textured paint. It was difficult to imagine any of this assembly resisting the weather for long. The Leapspan and plywood would both deteriorate quickly if they got wet, and in fact, had done so. Ms. Savage could find nothing reassuring to say about the material, or our case. They were both unfortunate. The defense thanked Ms. Savage and filed her report, mercifully never to reappear. The discoveries proved a little more helpful. Under questioning, Otaine and the supplier confirmed that they had met and discussed the product. The plaintiff had only agreed to use the material after being assured that it was weatherproof. The architect's claim that she had been instructed to use the material was also confirmed. This would shift at least some of the liability back to the plaintiff as contributory negligence. The discoveries generally solidified what the evidence already indicated. The material would have to be replaced, and all parties bore some degree of responsibility. At the subsequent pretrial, the judge quickly became familiar with the basic issues. He suggested that the matter be settled, replacing the Leapspan with an exterior installation finishing system, or EFIS product, along the lines of what our expert had suggested. Combined with some bona fide precast stone details, it looked like $600,000 worth of work, not $2 million. The judge proposed that the plaintiff was at least 25% liable, since he had inserted himself into the process and might be found 50% liable at trial. As for the architect, the judge found her the most liable defendant, because she should have investigated the product and warned her client. As a professional, she could not use the just following orders argument. The judge believed the general contractor to be less liable, but he too should have exercised more common sense. This went for the leap span supplier as well. He should have warned that his product was unsuitable for exposure to the harsh Canadian winters. Ontario is a long way from Cancun. The parties agreed to abide by the judge's advice, more or less. The Mexican manufacturer backed up their Canadian agents in order to protect their good name. The contractor paid his share, and Pro-Demnity paid out about half the minimum that would have been required had the matter gone to trial. Further investigation of the miracle product revealed that LeapSpan had been used previously in Canada and the US, as the supplier had claimed, but only in film and stage sets. Any kind of water testing would quickly have shown that the material dissolves when wet, and the thin skin coat of acrylic did little to help. There are two authentic takeaways from this tale of faux fabrication. Lesson number 1. Don't be enticed by sunny lifestyle images in glossy brochures. If a product hasn't been Canadian climate tested, don't specify it until it has. Lesson number 2. Imagining that complex and expensive-looking work can be faked at a fraction of the price of the real thing only guarantees ultimate disappointment. In the immortal words of tattoo artist Norman Keith Collins, a.k.a. Sailor Jerry, good work ain't cheap, cheap work ain't good. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Claims-Free Architect. We hope it was instructive and entertaining, and that it might help you be proactive in managing liability risks in your architectural practice. In this episode, we've learned that you shouldn't be enticed by sunny lifestyle images in glossy brochures. Ontario's climate can be harsh and may lead to costly material failures. It's always unwise to imagine that complex and expensive-looking work can be faked at a fraction of the price of the real thing. Remember that every jurisdiction and every case is different. Always refer to the laws and regulations governing your local jurisdiction and consult legal, architectural, and insurance professionals about the unique circumstances of your own case. For more architectural risk awareness tips and new podcast announcements, sign up for our newsletter at Pro-Demnity.com. If you liked this story, follow The Claims-Free Architect in your favorite podcast app. The original Pro-Demnity stories were written by David Croft and have been adapted for audio by Gordon Grice. The stories are performed by Liam Gadsby and produced by Revelator Studio, Toronto. The publisher and executive producer of the written stories and audio episodes is Pro-Demnity Insurance Company, Toronto. For more information, including the full legal disclaimer, visit Pro-Demnity.com.